Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Now today we're going to be talking about, surprise, yet another ETF. This one's a little bit different because we're talking about the first Bitcoin ETF, which just launched I think a week or two ago, and it's trading under the ticker symbol BITO. Now for today, I really wanted to talk about some of the key things that I think you need to know, some of the pros and cons of this ETF. And then at the end of the video, I'm just going to give my thoughts on the product and whether I would personally invest in it. Now, of course, if you are new to the channel, please do like and subscribe, turn on your notifications so that you get notified every time I put up a new video. And it really helps out with the YouTube algorithm, just putting the video in front of other people that might be looking for the same answers you are. Now, without further ado, guys, let's get straight into today's video. Now, the Bitcoin ETF. Now, what is an ETF? I've gone over this several times in the channel, but basically an ETF is a fund or a group of assets that's actually designed to track the performance of a specific asset or a group of assets. And so, for example, if you wanted to get exposure to something like gold, instead of actually going out and buying the physical gold bars and the gold bullion, you can actually buy a share of the gold ETF. Now, this would actually help you eliminate all the problems of, the delivery, the storage. I mean, storing tons of gold isn't exactly the most economic thing to do, but instead of doing that, you can buy a share of the gold ETF, which will then give you a paper claim for your ownership of that gold, right? A lot more convenient and a lot easier to deal with. And of course, the gold ETF is designed to track the spot price of gold itself. Obviously, for the Bitcoin ETF, the underlying asset, instead of gold, it's going to be Bitcoin. Simple and easy, right? Unfortunately, it never really is. Now, let's take a deeper look into the Bitcoin ETF. Now, to start off, a good place to start researching into the ProShares Bitcoin ETF is just by looking at their summary prospectus. Now, if we actually look into the summary prospectus and look at what their investment strategy is, I'm going to read that verbatim for you. You're going to see that for principal investment strategies, the fund seeks to provide capital appreciation primarily through managed exposure to Bitcoin futures contract. And then in bold, the fund does not invest directly in Bitcoin. Key things to take away from there. One, the fund gives you exposure to Bitcoin through futures contracts. And then right after that, in bold, the fund does not directly invest in Bitcoin, which also means the fund does not actually own any Bitcoin. So what does this mean for you as the investor? So firstly, let's discuss what are futures contracts. If we hop onto Investopedia, futures are derivative financial contracts that obligate the parties to transact an asset at a predetermined future date and price. The buyer must purchase or the seller must sell the underlying asset at the set price, regardless of the current market price at the expiration date. So basically, futures contracts is just a contract between two parties to agreeing to buy or sell a commodity, usually a commodity or an underlying asset at a specific price at a set time in the future, or by a set time in the future. Hence the name futures. Now, the Bitcoin ETF is simply trading futures contracts, not Bitcoin itself. And that's how it's planning on tracking the spot price of Bitcoin. Now, the next question that might come up from this is, why don't they just go out and buy Bitcoin itself, right? Much like the gold ETFs, whereby if they're trying to track the performance of gold ETF, every time you invest, say, $1,000 into it, they would obviously, or they're supposed to go out and buy more gold. Instead, with these guys, obviously you put $1,000 into the ETF, and what they're putting that towards is the futures contract. Now, why wouldn't they go out and actually buy Bitcoin itself? And the simple answer is the SEC doesn't allow them to basically trade physical Bitcoin, because with their regulations, they find it easier for them. It's much easier for the SEC to regulate futures contract rather than the actual physical trading of the Bitcoins themselves. Now, the next thing you need to know about the Bitcoin ETF is that it's actually quite expensive. And what I mean by expensive is their expense ratio is coming in at 0.95%, which is pretty high for an ETF. Now, in a previous video that I did, recommending the ETFs that I would invest my money into, there were fees as low as 0.03%. In that video, I sort of went over the differences in, something like 0.3%, 0.03%, and 0.85%. And the fees over a period of time do pan out to be quite a big difference. And obviously, a fee coming in at 0.95% is quite high. And not only that, with the Bitcoin ETF, there are transactions costs that aren't covered under that 0.95%. In the prospectus, they do advise that because of portfolio turnover, there might be other fees such as commissions that can affect the performance of the ETF over the long term. And when I say commissions and fees, it's because of the portfolio turnover. Obviously, they're trading contracts, so they're doing a lot of buying and selling of contracts, especially when it comes to the expiry dates of these contracts. And because of that, every time they buy or sell one, the platform that they are using or the brokerage that they're buying and selling these through do obviously charge commissions, and those tend to add up and obviously take away from the performance of the ETF. So that's something that you really need to keep in mind or do a bit of research into if you are thinking of buying into this at an ETF. From my point of view, at 0.95%, and then topped on with the transactions costs, the extra transaction costs, it almost works out to be the same cost as a mutual fund. Now guys, if you are getting some value out of the video so far and you're really enjoying it, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. Again, it helps out heaps with the YouTube algorithm. So we've gone over some of the key things you need to know before investing into this ETF. And one, we found they don't actually own any physical Bitcoin. Two, it's quite expensive from an ETF's perspective comparing to other ETFs. And then three, they probably won't do very well in tracking the spot price of Bitcoin because they're actually trading futures contracts. Now, why would you buy it then, right? I mean, that's the kind of the last question. Once you've spent about 10 minutes looking into this thing, is you leave yourself thinking, why would you buy this thing? And some of the things that I can think of as to why you might want to buy this thing is, one, it's convenient, right? And this could be suitable for those who are looking to get some exposure to Bitcoin, but don't want to go through the hassle of learning how to properly buy a Bitcoin, how to properly store a Bitcoin, and going through the KYC laws, which is the Know Your Customer laws, with the exchanges, right? This might be for someone who has seen the rise of Bitcoin and they are wanting to dip their toe in the water and get some exposure to Bitcoin, but they don't want to go through the whole hassle of learning how to properly buy and store Bitcoin, right? It's obviously already on a platform because you can just buy it from your brokerage that you're already buying your stocks and things from. So because this is now an ETF, you can then obviously just buy it off the brokerage that you've already got set up. Number two, the other reason why you might want to buy this is if you are a trader and you're looking for a way to short Bitcoin or to buy and sell options of Bitcoins. This thing is going to get heavily traded. I think it's already had some pretty high trading volumes as soon as it opened up. So this thing is going to allow traders to either buy options, call and put options, or of course short Bitcoin if they are bearish on Bitcoin. And number three, the other reason why someone could make the argument to buying this and adding this to their portfolio is because it's an ETF, you might actually be able to buy this in a non-taxable account, right? Like in the States, they have the Roth IRAs or the IRAs, and then you'll have exposure to the upside of Bitcoin without having to worry about that getting taxed on those capital gains. But then again, a key thing to remember there is you don't actually own any physical Bitcoin. You just own the rights to a futures contract, right? So there's no you don't actually own the underlying Bitcoin. It is just a futures contract. So that's a key thing to remember if that's your mindset of thinking or that's the way you're approaching it. Now, for me personally, I don't really see the point in buying this ETF if you are someone who's really bullish on Bitcoin. If you're really someone who sees the upside of Bitcoin, I would just go buy Bitcoin myself, learn how to store it, learn how to actually properly buy it and store it, get a hard wallet and all of that jazz, rather than, wasting your time buying this ETF. I mean, that's just me personally. And also, I feel like if you're someone that's spent, more than 10 minutes looking into what Bitcoin is, you will instantly see that with this ETF, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of Bitcoin. The promise of Bitcoin being a decentralized sovereign individual. With this ETF, you're just buying a paper claim to Bitcoin, which again, in my opinion, kind of defeats one of the main reasons that attracts a lot of people to buying Bitcoin. Right, so that's the video for today, guys. Let me know down below if you got any value out of the video. If you have any questions around the ETF, I'll link the prospectus summary down below if you want to go ahead and do a bit of research on this yourself. But for now, me personally, I'm staying away from it, but it is a positive sign that showing that the bigger funds and the SEC and Wall Street is generally starting to maybe accept Bitcoin. But then again, that's a whole different ballgame and well above my head. I'm just here to give you some general information about these financial assets and help you make a better decision for yourself. But with that being said, guys, thank you for sticking around this long. Click on the videos on the screen now to take you to more videos like this one to help you learn and get your financial freedom.